Good evening, everyone. My name is Olga Teteruk. I am a board member of CFA Society Ukraine. It's my pleasure to welcome you today at our discussion on ESG standards. Why does it matter? ESG metrics are not commonly part of mandatory financial reporting of real sector companies, and it's even less common for financial industry. Numerous institutions are working on the standards and define materiality to facilitate incorporation of those factors in the investment process. At the end of last year, the CFA Institute released Global ESG Disclosure Standards for investment products. These standards are designed to communicate information about an investment product's considerations of environmental, social, and governance issues in its objectives, investment process, or stewardship activities. The National Security and Stock Market Commission of Ukraine, also in December 2021, summarized the practice of applying corporate governance legislations and took another step towards the extensions of the sustainable finance in investments. The National Bank of Ukraine presented Sustainable Finance Development Policy 2025. The document, developed in cooperation with international financial corporations, aims to shape the future landscape of sustainable finance in Ukraine. According to the policy, the NBU will develop recommendations for the disclosure of ESG information and metrics by the end of 2023 for banks and by late 2024 for non-banking financial institutions. So why ESG standards important for the financial markets? What is the next steps for standards to be implemented? We're going to talk with three prominent speakers from all over the world. So please welcome Chris Fielder, Senior Director, Global Industry Standards at CFA Institute. Chris leads the promotion of CFA Institute industry codes and standards globally and helps to identify errors when new standards are needed. Maxim Libanov, Commissioner, National Security and Stock Market Commission. Maxim takes care of the adaptations of the relevant legislations of Ukraine to the EU legislations, implementations of international standards, IOSCO, IOPS, OECD, and other international organizations, worked on the program and strategic documents on the development of capital markets. And Arsen Makarchuk, Director, Strategy and Development Department, National Bank of Ukraine. Arsen has been working at the National Bank since June 2015, and as of now, take care of ESG-related issues and sustainable finance in the National Bank. Chris, my first questions will be to you. Why did the CFA Institute decide to develop global ESG disclosure standards? Why it is important now?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you about this important work that we've done. CFA Institute undertook the Global ESG Disclosure Standards for investment products because we saw investors in the marketplace having difficulty being able to evaluate investment products to determine whether or not they are appropriate for their ESG related needs and preferences. And so like the GIPS standards that we've developed and have been adopted by over 1,800 organizations in 47 markets, we thought we could do something similar there to facilitate transparency and to create a level playing field in the marketplace. So the Global Investment Performance Standards, or the GIPS standards, are standards for how investment managers should calculate and present historical performance to clients and prospective clients. And these new ESG standards are standards for how investment managers should communicate how they've incorporated ESG approaches into a product's investment objectives, into its investment process, and/or its stewardship activities. So this is, again, information that many investors, advisors, distributors, consultants would like to have. The problem is it's just not clear what the disclosure expectations are. And so you'll see investment managers, you'll see investors, institutional investors usually, consultants, others, asking for a lot of customized information through due diligence questionnaires or RFPs. And on the other side, you see investment managers trying to figure out, well, what should I disclose? How much should I disclose? How much detail? What should I cover? And that kind of a problem can be solved through standards. And so that is basically why we undertook this important work. We're happy that at the end that we built on some of the prior work on several prior efforts that have been out there, and we've created a universal or a global standard that works with all types of investment products, all types of ESG approaches, all asset classes, and in all markets.
Thank you, Chris. Maxim, my next questions will be to you. The Commission started the work on Corporate Governance Code in 2020, and last year there was some additional work done by implementing an annex to it. Could you please explain what international standards have been used, and are there any other standards, regulations available in this area on the market?
Thank you for your question. First of all, I would like to welcome everybody at this event. It's my pleasure and honor to be part of it. Regarding your question, I would like to say that initially when we planned those documents, when we planned the
cannot hear him.
Document on corporate governance, which later became Corporate Governance Code of Ukraine. And when
Excuse me, Maxim?
Maxim,
Can
Maxim,
you?
apology. It is hard to hear you, so maybe can you switch on the mute on your mic, or be closer to your mic?
Is this better right now?
Not really.
Okay, so let me then reconnect from another device.
Okay. Thank you. While we're waiting for Maxim to reconnect, Arsen, maybe I can take an hour and ask you questions. So in 2021, the National Bank of Ukraine has presented sustainable finance development policy till 2025. What was the basis for its development? What are the key milestones of its implementation?
Thank you, Olga, and hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all the participants of our event. It's a great opportunity to speak here. So the National Bank of Ukraine has taken the role of architect of the financial sector according to the Financial Sector Development Strategy 2025 that was presented early 2020, almost more than 2 years ago, actually. Within this activity, we understand the contribution that state has to play to develop a better, greener economy, and the contribution of the central bank as the regulator of the financial sector to the development of sustainable financing. The National Bank of Ukraine has become the regulator of not only for banks, not only for banking sector of Ukraine, but according to the split law in mid-2020, we have taken over the financial sector, non-banking financial sector institutions. And therefore, all our efforts are directed to regulating both of these sectors. Within our effort for a better future, for a better financial sector, we have concluded an agreement with International Financial Corporation in spring last year. The agreement to develop the financial sector, the sustainable financing policy. And together in working group with the IFC, we have performed this development. We were aided also by our partners from the Sustainable Banking and Financial Network, SBFN, and NGFS, Network for Greening the Financial System, which the National Bank of Ukraine has become member of early 2021. Within our efforts, with help of our international partners and with prominent contribution of the International Financial Corporation, we have developed this policy for development ESG finance in Ukraine that has been presented, as you said, November last year. So this policy envisages the overall direction and the vector of development of regulatory efforts of the National Bank of Ukraine, as well as other activities aimed at the development of the ESG finance in Ukraine. Within this policy, we have the roadmap of our activity, which basically focuses on four main areas with defined deadlines for their implementation. First is the implementation of the ESG standards into corporate governance of financial institutions, which is aimed at establishing such standards for banks, and we did it not mandatory in our methodological, so-called methodological recommendations published December last year on incorporation of ESG standards in corporate governance of banks. Same approach will be taken to non-bank financial institutions in 2024. For other directions is the ESRM, environmental and social risk management, that will become the element of a framework already this year, and for non-banking financial institutions also in 2024. The third domain, the third area of application of our regulatory efforts is the implementation of evaluation of the ecological impact of projects for their financing 2023 and 2024 respectively. And last but not least is the implementation of disclosure standards for financial institutions that will also be made for both domains till 2024. So these basically are four key areas of application of our efforts, and the development of such regulation will be the milestones of our policy.
Thank you, Arsen. So we will expect the step-by-step movement in financial industry in Ukraine in order to implement ESG metrics. Maxim? Okay. Are you back? So you're with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, it's much better. So my question is still the same for you. What international standards have been used for the development of an annex and corporate governance code? And also, are there any other standards or regulations available in this area in Ukraine? Thank you.
Okay, let's try one more time. Initially, when we planned basic core document on corporate governance, which later became Corporate Governance Code of Ukraine, and later this year, when we planned an annex fully dedicated to ESG principles, we based all our research and drafting of the document on two basic documents, which are OECD principles and recommendations of G20 on corporate governance. Basically, those are two primary documents which we used, and in our opinion, it's the most advanced documents on corporate governance on the international level, which exist, and at the same time, we of course we're looking to documents which are established by various international associations, including, of course, CFA.
Thank you, Maxim. It's nice to hear that Ukrainian legislation is in line with what is going on in Europe. Chris, my next questions will be to you and will be with regard to greenwashing. Like right now, it's a lot is like popular things to take. I'm following the ESG, I'm following the climate risk initiatives. I'm start to be net zero in like a couple of years, or following to net zero policy. How do you think the standards can help to eliminate greenwashing on the market? And what do you think about the third-party verifications of the reports? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I think first, let's kind of establish a definition for greenwashing. I think most people would say that's the intentionally false or misleading statements about the environmental, social, or governance characteristics of a product, or overstating the effect that a product might have on those issues, or how much those issues are used in the management of the product, or how much those issues are considered. But it also could be the unintentional sort of misleading of consumers. And that can come about when investment firms write their marketing material. Usually when you're trying to pitch a product, you talk very much in generalities, you talk about the positive aspects of the product, and one needs to be careful about their writing of that type of material, because you have to be careful not to overstate these things. And therefore, what's good about our standards is that managers have to make these disclosures in more of a technical way, and we provide guidance or standards for how to communicate that information to investors. Let me just give you one example: is exclusions. So it's not uncommon for an investment product to say something like, "We exclude coal." Well, what does that really mean? What are we talking about? Coal mining? Are we talking about coal refining? Are we talking about transportation of coal? Are we talking about the burning of coal? So the standards say that a manager has to state the characteristic that they are examining, the threshold that they use, and whether or not an investment is included or excluded as a result, as well as any third-party standards that they might use in either establishing that threshold or in the measurement process. So that's where standards can give people more insight into exactly how the product is put together. It does not get into the labeling aspect of products, though. And what we found is that people definitely have their own assumptions when it comes to terms like sustainable or responsible or green. And without some sort of definitions around those terms or technical criteria, it can easily there can easily be miscommunication, right? A manager could say they're offering a responsible product, but I look at it and I think, well, that's not a responsible product. So, until we get to until a market has technical standards or legislation for the use of certain words, really the best thing we can do is have good disclosures, so that if you mean one thing and you've assumed one definition or approach when, say, you've put together a product as an investment manager, and I assume something different as an investor or a client, at least by reading these disclosures, we can figure that out, and we can avoid mis-selling, and I can end up avoiding a product that isn't right for me. So I guess I'll end it there for now. I could go a lot deeper into how one might define these things like responsible or sustainable, but maybe we'll get into that later.
Thank you, Chris. Arsen, Maxim, what do you think? Will greenwashing be a problem in Ukraine? So maybe Maxim, start with you.
I think greenwashing could be a real problem in any jurisdiction, not only in Ukraine. And of course, we are, as a regulator, should deal with it and should make everything possible when we will establish appropriate regulations to make greenwashing as least possible as it could be. Of course, nobody could give 100% guarantee that greenwashing is eliminated or fully avoided. But what we can do, we can make issuers issuers of green bonds, of course, to disclose all the relevant information. This is the first requirement, and the second one is to verify the project that is going to be financed through bond issuance. And of course, this verification process also should be regulated, and it should be done by some reputable agent, and potential investors should have enough level of trust to information which is provided by green bonds issuer, and to information that is disclosed and verified by this specific agent.
Thank you, Maxim. Arsen, do you want anything to add?
Yes, I would also agree with Chris and Maxim that the greenwashing is an issue, and it is going to become even a bigger issue in future as we as the state proceed with implementation of greener standards, not only for financial sector, but for economy in general. In this regard, we, as the regulator for banks and non-banking financial institutions, as for lenders, basically, will summarize all efforts to provide the sophisticated regulation to properly assess the borrower in order to assure his true activities, and to assure that no greenwashing is a case for assessment of the borrower or the project for future financing. Nevertheless, we also understand the impact of this assessment for operational costs of banks and non-banking financial institutions, and we also want to make this operational cost as an important element of the equation. Therefore, we also think on taking into account the information provided by the third parties, not only, as Maxim said, for green bond issuers, the reputable confirmation of the nature of activity of the future borrower, the organization that also provides such documents. Moreover, we have another initiative in the National Bank of Ukraine, so-called State Data Initiative. This is a project where we, as the National Bank of Ukraine, establish the connection towards other state authorities and state bodies to exchange the information provided in state registries and state databases. Not only for the National Bank of Ukraine, but also for the banks, and in future, possibly for non-banking financial institutions. Within this initiative, in nearest weeks, we plan to establish the informational exchange between the central bank, the banks, and the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Nature Resources of Ukraine, former Ministry of Ecology, and establish the connection to their databases, which basically include the information of on all the economic agents in Ukraine, all the enterprises operating there in Ukraine that have already declared or aiming at declare the ecological impact of their activities. This will be basically the big metallurgy, big other industry players, as well as smaller, however, also such enterprises that have an effect on the environment. Therefore, would rely also on this ministry data and the governmental data, basically on the economic agents' nature of activity. We think that with such instruments, together with our colleagues from National Security and Stock Market Commission, as well as other state agencies, we can reduce the risk of greenwashing to minimum.
Thank you, Arsen. It's really interesting to share that. And just a follow-up questions: who will be the end beneficiary of that data exchange? Will it be regulators, or like third-party or final consumers like myself or other investment banks can also use and verify the data?
Well, speaking of this particular data of that is in possession of a Ministry of Environmental Protection, I must say that this data is now publicly disclosed in state registries maintained by this ministry. Nevertheless, we aim at establishing the automated information exchange because at the moment it is available through inquiries on some web portal provided by this ministry. We aim to make this automated exchange for not only the regulator, but our key beneficiaries are financial institutions, which would use this data in order to perform the evaluation of the projects that are going to be financed. So we aim to make this information exchange automated with APIs interfaces, basically for financial institutions to include it and to build this integration with their core banking systems or other systems which are used for risk evaluation. And we think that these are our main beneficiaries in this initiative. Nevertheless, as I said, this information is also publicly disclosed, but it's not the mandate of the central bank, it's rather the mandate of the relevant ministry.
Thank you for clarification, Arsen. Chris, my next questions will be to you. Are there any restrictions on the implementations of Global ESG Disclosure Standards? What companies from which jurisdictions can use it? Thank you.
Yeah, so we've designed it to be used by investment managers all around the world. One thing that we had to look at was make sure that our disclosure standards didn't conflict with any national or regional regulation. And so we reviewed and analyzed SFDR in particular very closely. And I want to say that we're very happy that it's complementary to the disclosures that managers need to make under SFDR. And just to give you, an example of that, SFDR in some cases requires managers to make some very specific statements. For example, whether or not they consider ESG risks, or whether or not they consider principal adverse indicators in the design and management of a product. But on the other hand, sometimes the disclosure requirements are quite broad. One of them is describe this investment product strategy and how it achieves sustainable investment as an objective. A manager could write pages on that probably. And so, the way we've designed the standards is to really have conditional requirements that say, well, if you use exclusion, I'm paraphrasing here, but if you have exclusion criteria, then here's what you need to disclose. If you look at material ESG factors with respect to risk and return, here's what you need to disclose. If you use asset allocation targets or portfolio level, metrics, here's what you need to disclose. And so, I think it's a really useful framework for managers to think about, really, when I disclose my investment strategy, really, what are those main mechanisms that I'm using to bring ESG, issues into the product or create those ESG characteristics? So, in that way, it's very much aligned with SFDR. Hong Kong is another market that had some rules on the books that we had to pay attention to. And really in all other markets, including like the UK and the US, Canada, India, regulators are actually still working through the rulemaking process. And so in those markets, we think we've provided an excellent resource for regulators to look at and see, well, kind of what's a good way to construct these disclosure requirements. And I think it's notable that these standards were created through a group of volunteers that have expertise and experience in actually building these kinds of products. So, we've tapped into that expertise, and we had people from both the manager side, as well as consultants, service providers, asset owners. So it's representing the needs of a broad, broadly all market participants. So yeah, I think that answered the question there of what markets really. So it's really all markets, and we've seen signs of people being interested in these standards really in a number of different markets, and we already have managers in a number of different markets starting to write their investment product disclosures.
Okay, Chris, and maybe the follow-on also will be to you. It's mentioned in the standards that CFA Institute must be notified if a firm decided to use it. So do you know how many companies already make a notification to CFA Institute, from what countries? Are there any?
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone has notified us as of yet. It's still early days. It's only been out for 2 to 3 months now. And it just takes some time. This isn't the kind of standard that a manager can just say, I'm a signatory to, I believe in these principles. They actually have to create underlying policies and procedures. They have to create ESG disclosure statements. They have to make those statements available to investors. So there's definitely work to be done. And I've spoken to a number of firms, who are interested, and it seems like the first step that they need to do is socialize the standards internally and educate different people in different departments, say their legal and compliance team, their portfolio management team, marketing, et cetera. And then what they're doing is typically they're starting to pilot the standards using one particular product, maybe one that they're about to launch or one that they think would be appropriate. And the notification process is very simple. We just ask for 2 points of contact and how many disclosure statements you've developed and how many have been independently verified. So managers don't need to submit their ESG disclosure statements to us. Those are for their clients and for their investors. We just want to have a mechanism to know who's using the standards, right? How successful we've been in terms of adoption, and points of contact should we need to make, announcements or updates to the standards.
Thank you. So the CFA Institute will be a hub of statistical data, basically. Who is using, for what purposes, how many in which region, which countries?
Yeah, that's right. And that's really kind of the same data we collect about our other standards.
Thank you. Arsen, my next questions will be to you with regard to banks and their reporting process. From the policy, it's mentioned that 2022 will be the first year when banks start to implement some of their ESG standards or requirements. Could you please expand on that one? What will be mandatory for banks starting from this year? What do you see as a key challenge and opportunities?
Well, to begin with, as what I already mentioned, late last year in late December, we have published our amendments to methodological recommendations on organization of corporate governance in the banks. As I said, at the moment, they are not mandatory, they are rather recommendations to include the ESG aspects into corporate governance with relevant committees, with relevant members of the supervisory board, etc. Nevertheless, we assume and we see already that the requirements of some of the mother companies of the banks with international equity already have such standards partially or overall in place. However, we are also thinking, and we will also take into account the experience of these recommendations implementation. We are also thinking on these requirements becoming mandatory at some point in future. However, as I said, we will take into account the effect of implementation of these recommendations at the moment. Other things that the banks should expect in 2022 this year, first of all, are the requirements on ecological and social risk management, ESR, and inclusion of these requirements into their risk management frameworks. I would not disclose more on this. However, I must say that This new regulation will be published according to the roadmap envisaged by the policy by the end of the second quarter, somewhere around May or June, I believe. And another thing which will also become the part of regulation already this year by the end of fourth quarter is the first requirements on disclosure of banks and nature of their activity and nature of their policies, financing policies, and inclusion of ESG aspects into these policies. So the exact status of this issues at the moment. However, we do not expect that all the banks, we do not require all the banks to include all the aspects of evaluation of the ecological matters into their decision-taking process, because as I said, these requirements will be there only in 2023. Therefore, to summarize, two main developments already this year, ESRM and the disclosure standards.
Thank you, Arsen. And I will follow up with you on project funding and on sustainable finance. In the program, it is mentioned that sustainable finance policy envisage evaluation and selections of projects for funding, depending on their role in sustainable development. So will it be required for all projects? Will it be for banking institutions or non-financial institutions and their decision to what to fund, what to not to fund, how to analyze a project? So could you please expand on this statement?
So yes, what we see now and how it will work at this point, as we see it, is that all the financial institutions at some point, not only the banks in 2023, but also non-banking financial institutions in 2024, will have to assess the ESG impact of the projects they select for financing and to take this educated decision, having this data in their mind. However, we see that the traditional, I would say, this old school dirty projects will also be let me say at some point will also be probable for funding. However, funding of these projects will be taken on least favorable conditions. However, the nature of these conditions will majorly constitute on the impact of disclosure of this information. Moreover, in our roadmap, we also envisage the study of the macro financial impact of this matter, and also taking regulatory, let's say, taking the decision to adjust our macroprudential policies with ESG aspects in mind. However, at this point in time, we see that major financial regulators over the globe have not yet implemented such thing in their policies. However, they are studying and they're studying the possibility of this approach. And we would like also to remain in line with the approach that is taken by our reference regulators and by the international financial institutions. Therefore, we are confident that the macroprudential effect will also be studied and necessary decisions will be taken. However, at this point, we limit ourselves to taking the decision, studying it. We are not ready, as I said, to declare what will be these macroprudential tools used in order to promote ESG financing.
Thank you, Arsen. Maxim, my next question will be to you. Do you see a synergy between initiatives of National Bank of Ukraine and Corporate Governance Code? Arsen mentioned that there was an amendment to Corporate Governance of Banks as one point, and another point with this project funding and reporting of companies. Can company using the recommended Commission guidance basically made a report which will be suitable for banks to evaluate? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I would say that there are a number of researches that show us that corporate governance has a very big influence and impact on financial evaluation of the company, on its market capitalization, on value of resources it can borrow, and I can say that if a legal entity will follow the corporate governance code and ESG principles in particular, then it will pay a less price for getting access to financing, rather through issuance of bonds or through any other potential channels, banking, lendings, or whatever. So there is a definite direct correlation between good corporate governance and value of resources. If company follows best principles, then the resources are cheaper and the capitalization of such company is higher.
Okay, Maxim. Chris, my next question will be to you with regard to future steps. What is the next step of CFA Institute in ESG reporting era?
So the thing we're working on now is a handbook, a technical handbook that will provide people with more information about the provisions. We are also working on an optional template. So when we put the standards out for public comment, we heard an almost universal request to have a standardized format so that managers kind of a simple way to make these disclosures and that investors can make comparisons on a disclosure by disclosure basis. And then the last thing we're working on is independent assurance procedures. And those are procedures by which an independent party could test the disclosures that a manager has made about a particular product and kind of look behind that to policies and procedures and ensure that that information is complete and accurate. Beyond that, and we're hoping to have those things out in the next three to 4 months. Beyond that, we might take a look at ESG reporting for investment products to see if those could be standardized, or if at least we could set general principles or expectations around what sort of information, metrics, results, characteristics should be reported to investors on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Chris. This sounds like a lot of work to be done and lots of research as well within the market participants and there of legislation. Maxim, what is the next step of the Commission in the era? Are you also looking to make recommendations for investment products, similar to what CFA already developed?
Disclosure requirements is definitely is what we have on our agenda and what we are working right now. I would say that now we are developing a number of regulatory standards and requirements, which will describe the actual process of green bonds issues, what should be prepared, what should be disclosed, what should be verified, how it should be assembled in the prospectus and in other documents at the very beginning, when company just begins the process of issuer And at the same time, we are developing a new regulation on disclosure rules for issuers, where we will describe the ongoing disclosure requirements, in particular annual reporting and interim reporting, and of course, we will specify in those requirements what should be disclosed regarding specific green project or sustainable project which is being financed through issue of green bonds. That's what we are going to do in nearest future, what we hope to finalize till end of first half of this year. And later this year, after that, we will proceed with all other documents.
Thank you, Maxim. So it's also lots of work for a commission. So looking forward to see new documents in this era and new requirements and regulation. Arsene, my next question will be to you. As it's a policy and it has like final date of 2025, how will National Bank of Ukraine measure the success of the policy? So let's assume we are now in 2025 and you need to discuss and talk through the policy, how successful it was. Are there any KPIs in mind, or I don't know how you're going to do it?
Well, frankly, when we discussed the overall document that would establish the plan for National Bank to develop its regulatory approaches, we considered probably the strategy as the form of document, but this is perhaps the difference between the strategy and the policy, and one of the arguments why one of the reasons why we stopped on the policy level is that we do not say the exact KPIs for the measurement of the process, because the reason for this is that the development of sustainable finance requires not only the regulation, not only the framework we are aimed to provide, but also this part of request of, let's say, the need for this product from the market, and this need is created by the efforts not of the financial service regulator, but by the state in general. So the development of the speed of the development and the volume of the development of sustainable finance will also depend on the government policy on ecological approach, the green course of the implementation here in Ukraine, and the requirements that are applied towards industry giants and towards other enterprises working there in industry. Therefore, we will measure the success of our policy in timely implementation of these steps we have foreseen in our roadmap. It may sound a little bit less ambitious, but I have two reasons to say so. First is that the implementation of these regulatory steps will be there in cooperation with banking and non-banking financial sector. And we have already started this dialogue. Some weeks ago, I was present there on the round table with bank management CEOs and deputies of the banks, where we discussed the roadmap itself. And we heard that banks do have some specific, concerns with timeliness of implementation of these steps, taking into account the overall trends that are there in economy, and also taking into account the recent developments that are there. I mean, the Corona crisis and other financial stability factors that have impact on financial stability. The second thing is that we are in cooperation with government, and the government has a leading role in it. We know that the government now establishes this broader infrastructure, or should I say the broader facility to discuss and to align the policies of different agencies in order to establish, in order to make sure that Ukrainian commitments taken by us in following the green course and other international commitments according to ecological, social, and other aspects will be fulfilled by the state regulation. Therefore, we are confident that our approach is right. We are confident that the steps we are taking will lead to provision of framework for development of sustainable finance, and we will do all that depends on us to make sure that these products are accepted by the market, and the market develops with faster and broader development and implementation of ESG financing.
Thank you, Arsen. So we are now turning to a question from an audience. So please feel free to put your questions into the chat or raise your hand. So far, we have one question to Arsen. What specific ESG metrics would be the most important for banks during their project evaluation process?
Thank you for this question. So I must say firstly that this regulation will be there in a year, and therefore we more than a year, and therefore some aspects of it may be still adjusted. We will also take into account the developments that will be taken by other state agencies and by the international, our peer central banks and other relevant agencies and authorities. However, I must say already that main criteria for selection of the projects for financing will rely on that envisaged by the regulation of European Parliament on the establishment of a framework to facilitate sustainable investment, which says that the project selected for financing should comply with at least one of 6 ecological goals, which are the mitigation of climate change effect, the adaptation of climate change, the sustainable usage and protection of water and sea resources, the transition to circular or sustainable economy, the prevention of pollution of environment and control over this pollution, and the protection and restoration of biodiversity. So at least one of these goals, and compliance with all 4 principles of sustainable financing according to this regulation of the EU, which are the contribution to fulfillment of the goal, the non-contradiction with any other of these 6 goals, the compliance with minimal social guarantees, and the compliance with technical criteria envisaged by this regulation of the European Union. Moreover, we will also take into account the Sustainable Europe Investment Plan that was there to elaborate the European Green Deal implementation, the European Green Deal Investment Plan published in January 2020. So this selection criteria and the metrics will be based on basically these 2 regulations with specifics that will be required by for adoption it in our economy.
Thank you, Arsen. I'm checking whether there is any question from an audience. Maxim, maybe I have one question to you with regard, you several times mentioned the green bonds. Can you name a couple of criteria which can be called the green bonds? So like,
The definition of green bond is established by a new capital markets law, which took into force on the 1st of July last year. And it covers financing of any type of ecology program, project or green project. And in particular, what we could say is that any type of project which creates a new system, for example, for reducing pollution, or for any type of carbon, I would say, decarbonization of production process, or any type of decreasing of resources which are used, not renewable resources, reducing of energy or gas consumption, or whatever. So it could be pretty much any kind of project, but it should fit into taxonomy which are established by international associations, for example, ICMA, International Capital Market Association. They have a taxonomy for green bonds, and of course, such project should be verified that it fits into this taxonomy.
Thank you, Maxim. Chris, we have a question to you. Is there any cooperation between CFA Institute and newly created ISSB, NZFSPA, Net Zero Working Group, or directly with the standard settler, as consistency of disclosure requirements in is key here? Thank you.
Yeah, let me first tackle the ISSB question, because these are two different areas, let's say. So the ISSB is working on issuer disclosure standards or issuer reporting standards. So they are very much in line of what SASB's already done and what CDP has done. Ours are different in that they focus on the disclosures that investment managers should make to their clients. So it's a different part of the value chain, a different part of the information communication chain. With respect to net zero, to my knowledge, like we haven't participated in any net zero initiatives or collaborations at this point. But we are starting to work on a number of things in the area of climate and particularly net zero. So we will be doing more in this space, and I think the approach we'll be taking really is, how can we help prepare investment professionals and give them the skills that they need to address the net zero commitments that their clients are making. So things would be, how to incorporate carbon price into your valuations, how to construct portfolios that are on a net zero sort of glide path, or that have been developed according to different scenarios. So there's really a lot of technical work that needs to be done to implement these net zero commitments. And I think a lot of exciting problems that will need to be solved, and that investment professionals are particularly suited to solve. So I think this will be just a really exciting area, over the next couple of decades.
Thank you, Chris. Maxim Arsen, there is a question from audience with regard to where they can find documents. So whether all these documents are publicly available. So I'll let you to answer. Of course, I know the answer, but I'll let you to answer, Maxim, where to find the documents that the Commission prepared on corporate governance code and annexed to it.
Well, basically, we are published. We already published them on our official website, and another what I want to say is that in somewhere in 1 month time, at end of March, we're planning to have an open event where we'll present and publicly discuss corporate governance code and we will present the corporate governance code and ESG supplement to market participants.
Thank you, Maxim.
For us, I should say that the National Bank of Ukraine is partially exposed to the law of state regulation policy that says that the regulators should have the preliminary public discussion of their documents before approving them. This is 100% true for non-banking financial institutions. So in accordance with this law, all the regulations will be available for at least 1 month for public discussion prior to their publication. I would say that this period will be longer according to our established practice, as well as for bank regulations. As soon as they are prepared, we would aim to have them for a public disclosure for some specific period of time. And for each piece of regulation, we will publicly announce start of their discussion as well as the results of it. Moreover, the communication is also a big part of plan of implementation of the roadmap set by the policy. So we aim to hold a series of events during the upcoming years. First of them will be the big event we are going to hold this year on green and sustainable finance and their implementation in banking and more broader financial sector. Therefore, I think that this big event will be the first kick-off of series of big public discussions where we'll present the concept of the documents, their main outlines, and have the ability to have hopefully a fruitful discussion of these parameters we are going to present. So I cannot yet announce the date of this event, the closest event. However, all of them will be publicly announced on our website.
Thank you, Arsen. And Chris, all the information with regard to ESG disclosure standards are on CFA.com.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to find it is just put CFA Institute ESG Standards into your search browser, and that'll take you right to the right page.
Thank you. I guess it's time to finish our discussion. So I'd like to say thank you to all our speakers, to Arsen, Chris, Maxim, for the prominent discussions, for all your inputs and insights on ESG regulations in Europe, world, Ukraine. So thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing new documents expanded and explanation on existing documentations. So thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, colleagues. Have a good evening.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a good to see you here. Bye.
Bye.